And I could see then when we had 17 shops, Insomnia was a better name. I could see then that we had potential to build a brand. My early vision when I started in this business in the late 90s was I might end up with 25 shops. I never thought to this day that it could grow to 150.
What if you had the opportunity to have coffee with your 18-year-old self? What advice would you offer? And would you actually take the advice and offer? I'm absolutely fascinated by that question. I interview people from all walks of life, from Heineken Cup winners, New York Times bestselling authors, local taxi man, you name them, I've interviewed them. Be inspired, learn and grow from the experience of others. Welcome to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly. My guest today is Bobby Kerr. Bobby is an Irish entrepreneur and successful broadcaster. You may know Bobby from his popular business show Down to Business and also being on Dragon's Den. Bobby is passionate about spa business and I'm delighted to have you on the show. Welcome on the show, Bobby.
Great to be here, Mark.
Bobby, for people that don't know you, would you mind giving me a bit of an overview about your journey to now?
I'm a 57-year-old Kilkenny man. I grew up in a business environment. My father was a hotelier. We owned quite a successful hotel in Kilkenny called the New Park for 50 years. I actually sold it in 2007, but he opened it up in 1966. So I grew up in a house that would have had business and life and family all very much fused as one. So I worked as a young fella in the business. I did part-time jobs there. I worked in the kitchen and all that. And then I went off to college in DIT in Calbrew Street. I studied catering and business. Really enjoyed that. While there, I worked as a chef part-time in the Peppermint Gardens, even though I never went to actually train as a chef, but I worked as one for many years. Then when I finished in DIT, I worked for 6 months in AIB in Bank Centre, which was probably the premium of, I suppose, industrial catering. It was the best site serving a few thousand meals a day, bar nowhere. It was incredible stuff there. And it was a really good place to work. And I had great experience there. Then I went and I worked on the oil rigs in the North Sea for 2 years as a chef on the basis that I just wanted something to do and to see a different world. And I did that. I literally took the opportunity at a rugby weekend over in Edinburgh. A guy said, "Can you start tomorrow?" And I said I could, and I did it for 2 years. Then I spent 3 years in Canada with that same company in management. I worked in stadiums and parks, ran an amusement park, all the catering and that. Came back to Ireland, worked for the Campbell Beauty Group for 13 years, a few years in the contract catering side of the business. I was the MD of Bewley's Oriental Cafes for 6 or 7 years. Went out on my own, set up a business called Perk, merged it with another business called Insomnia and Bendini and Shaw. We then had 17 shops, and we grew that business, Insomnia, me as the CEO for a long number of years, more latterly as chairman. We now have 150 shops and we're in 400 locations if you take convenience stores, etc. So we've built a big Irish brand over the last 20 years.
That's incredible. So many questions come to mind. Firstly, how did it feel to sell your family business when it's over 50 years? Was that a strange feeling for you?
It was and it wasn't. Interesting enough, I'd come from an environment where my father said, no job for you here, often make your own way, which I went and did. Then he got sick and he needed somebody. All my brothers and sisters were doing different things or weren't qualified to do it. I had just got my business going. I think I had 2 or 3 shops, and he said to me, "Why don't you come back here and I'll give you this business?" And I said, "No, I'm doing my own thing now." So I ended up going down there 1 day a week for a number of years, and then he died. And I worked that business as well as my coffee shop business for I think 6 or 7 years. And I used to have 2 different types of operating. When I went down there to Kilkenny, I was totally hands off. I had a team of people who did all the work and I met them every week. Then I came back to Dublin and I'd be wiping tables and making coffee and being on the floor. So I had these 2 different worlds of work. And I realized that if I was to make a continued success of both the businesses, that I couldn't keep doing that. So I said to my mother, "I think we should sell. We decided to sell. I'd say within 2 months of the recession hitting, we sold it, and we sold the business well. And I never regretted a minute of it. It was good to our family, all the shareholders who were some non-family, and also my brothers and sisters all did well out of it. Everybody got a few bob. It set my mother up. I wasn't, anyway, I remember the good times about it, and I remember it being very much part of me and what I did. But did I miss it for a day? I missed it, but I didn't regret it.
Great story. Did you learn anything by spending so much time on the oil rigs?
Yeah, I learned about different types of individuals. I learned about working with a superb product, because on the oil rigs, all the guys who were working out there, food was really all they had. There's no women, there's no booze. It's a very much a work environment, and the food has to be right up there. So we had the work and effort that went into the food was second to none. A lot of the chefs out there were all Michelin star chefs because the money was so good. But the customers were, I think they were 1-star, 5-star chefs, 1-star customers was our joke. But these guys were hard chaws, Glaswegians, Geordies, tough guys. And I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about, just basically working with people from all walks of life and getting on with people and working hard and enjoying it, but working hard and, respecting everybody for what they were. It was a great school of life for me.
Sounds like a super education. Was there times, because when you talk about your business now, everyone knows how successful it was there times where you had maybe 3, 4, 5 shops where you weren't getting the scale or the success, and did you change your strategy or change your tack that you started to become more successful in what you were doing, how you were doing it?
Yeah, like I was when I had 5 shops, and again it took me a while to get to 5 shops. I was a hand-to-mouth operation. I probably should have gone bust. I nearly did go bust a couple of times, but I probably should have gone bust on the basis that I was totally undercapitalized. I started off on a shoestring, and I had to run it in the early days on a shoestring. That was the only way I could survive. So I didn't have any management really. I used to have a route going around all the shops myself. I used to employ everybody. But I saw that if I was to grow the business, I couldn't keep doing that. And I then decided and that was part of my thinking, was to sell the business actually to Insomnia. My business was called Perk, and I ended up with 6 shops. But I knew that if I could be a smaller part of something bigger, and I could see then when we had 17 shops, Insomnia was a better name. I could see then that we had potential to build a brand. My early vision when I started in this business in the late 90s was I might end up with 25 shops. I never thought to this day that I could grow it to 150 or be in 500 locations.
When you nearly went bust or bankrupt, what gave you that belief to keep going? Because there's some people that maybe in that same situation now, because the economy's got better, but they've got an awful lot of debts and they've got different challenges they're working through. What gave you the strength, or did you have a mentor or something that... My
old fellow would have been a bit of a mentor to me, quietly. I also had partners in the early part of the business. Fitzers were a partner in the first business that I had. So I was a great believer in, having people that were vested in it as well. It wasn't always just me. And even when I think of people like Paddy Fitzpatrick, who would have been with me in the early days, he was a good mentor because he saw things differently to me. My old fellow was a good mentor because he had lived a life of business and he had made a few mistakes himself, and he definitely was. So that was one of the reasons. I was quite risk averse. In other words, I always had a difficulty, and I still have, of borrowing money that I would have an inability or a potential inability to pay back. And believe it or not, that has saved my bacon a number of times. I also have a fear of failure. I definitely have, in that, and I would have channeled that to try and make it a good thing rather than a bad thing. So fear of debt, fear of failure, and good partners and mentors.
That's quite interesting. So you had people that complemented your skill set around you, supporting you. You speak about fear of failure as well, because some people are driven by fear of failure, and then some people are driven to succeed. And there's a bit of a difference I've noticed. Do you find that the fear of failure is you don't want to be seen as you disappoint people, or is it a case of you've invested so much, I cannot let this?
I think it's about disappointing people and disappointing yourself. It would be certainly where it would be for me, you know, and I think I'm still driven by fear of failure. I think it's something that you either have or you don't have, and I think it, you know, if managed, it's a really good asset. It's a really good set of characteristics.
Yeah, I agree. So looking back, was there any kind of moment where you felt there was a tipping point for your business becoming more successful that you felt?
There was a couple of things. Before I merged with Insomnia, I got a contract up in UCD, which gave me 2 shops up there, which effectively brought me from a loss-making business into a profitable situation. So that was one, those two contracts up there. The second thing then was when I had effectively sold my business to Insomnia, Bendini and Shaw, and then I basically took over the combined business. And I could see definitely then that we had something that I could make, that I could really grow and scale. I went through a stage where I would have rolled the dice fairly continuously, and then you come to a point where I won't bet the house anymore. I'm at a point now, and again, particularly in the last couple of years, I've decided, you know, I know when enough's enough, and I know now that I don't really want to be risking it all, given my responsibilities now. I've probably come full circle on that, and I'm less risk averse now than I would have been 10 years ago.
What advice would you offer to small business owners? And I spoke before the show started about outside counting the traffic with a clicker, about other people going by the street to actually see if it's a good area for somebody to set up a new store. What practical piece of advice would you offer to small businesses that want to make the next stage of their growth?
Well, I think if you're opening a shop, like I think if you're operating in a city, the city is always moving, you know, and I look at sites that we would have had 15, 20 years ago that were great sites then that are no longer, like they're sites, but they're no longer delivering what they would have done. Even if I look at ones down on Bagot Street, for instance, then I look down on Grand Canal Dock and I see a place that there would have been tumbleweed growing through. So you've got to move with those locations. You've got to, and you know, we closed a shop in Pembroke Street recently. Again, I never thought I'd see Pembroke Street. You'd say, right, that's D2, that's what, but we closed one there because we no longer have the business there. And that's, so you gotta move your business with how the city is moving. I think we're in an area of great uncertainty, and I think uncertainty by its nature is problematic for business, where people decide, I won't open that shop, I won't hire those extra 4 people, I won't set up that depot in the west of Ireland that I was going to do. If you get uncertainty and people deferring decisions, the effect that has is a kind of an overall stagnation of the business landscape. And I worry about the uncertainty of the market at the moment and the damage that uncertainty causes. I think once we're told something, if we were told that Brexit means X, Y, and Z, then you get your head around it and you adapt your business to that. So I think we're going to have to, you know, it is difficult for lots of businesses, but I think we're going to have to look beyond what's happening and look and maybe take a little bit of risk on where we think it's going to end up, what we think is going to happen as a result of it. And again, it's a calculated guess in some cases. And I think work towards that, but don't work towards not doing anything.
So one thing that I always see with yourself is how you stay relevant. So you've got a very, very good business show with well over 1,000 listeners or 100,000 listeners. You're meeting upcoming guests who are doing different things at all times. You're getting to learn from them, also share your own type of experience as well. Does that give you a lot of energy for
Big
your
time.
business?
I'm naturally curious. I'm interested in people. You know, and I'm genuinely interested in people, what they did, what they didn't do, how they got it right, how they got it. And I'm not sort of flattered by it. I'm genuinely interested in the good, the bad, and what makes people up. And like any guest that comes on the show, I'll research them thoroughly. and I'll have a plan in my head loosely of where I want to go with them. I would always admire people who are kind of non-corporate. Like I often get people in, not often because I try not to have them, but you can get people in who are overly schooled, who are overly tutored in media relations, and they can be boring as hell. I like people like Ray Nolan maybe would be one, who could go anywhere, who could say anything, could do anything. He's just one that comes to mind, but that kind of...
Donovan Brothers.
Yeah, they were good too, yeah. But people that might just go somewhere that you wouldn't expect, I think keeps the listener entertained, keeps the listener there. Somebody telling you about how great they are and their corporate objectives is pretty boring stuff.
A final question. So if you're sitting down with an 18-year-old Bobby, what advice would you be offering to him? And he's definitely having a coffee, by the way.
I'd be saying always work in good places. Like in a place, it's not so much important what you do in that place, but if you find a good company that's growing, that's expanding, that's decent to its employees, and you get yourself into that company, the rest will actually, it'll more likely than not look after itself.
That's brilliant. Bobby, Kerr, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mark.
You've been listening to the What I Know Now podcast with Mark Kelly. To subscribe to the podcast, just enter WIKN into iTunes or any Android podcast of choice, or check out the website at www.wikn.co. We'd love to get your feedback, either positive or negative, about the episode and what action you're going to take. I look forward to seeing you next week, and remember, have an absolutely super day. Bye.